There is a lot of smoke in the Pacific Northwest these days, and Baylor, they don't want any part of it.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, a live edition here of the podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control over your finances. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off for your first year. Lots to get to today. An update on EuroBasket and AmeriCup. We have 4 different Zags who are participating in those 2 events. One of them already got underway. We'll talk about how Serbia looked in their first game, what's coming up with Mario Saint-Supery and Spain, as well as updates on Canada and the Dominican Republic, where we have a pair of other Zags participating. Plus, the CW's new media rights deal with the Pac-12 is official. We're going to talk about what we learned from this official announcement and what it means for Gonzaga in the second segment of the show. But we are leading with the news that ultimately was not a surprise by this point, as it had been kind of well established that this was not going to happen, but did become finalized on Tuesday when Baylor released their non-conference schedule for the upcoming 25-26 college basketball season, and it did not include Gonzaga. After agreeing to a 3-year series prior to the start of last season, where they were intending to play 1 game in Spokane, 1 game in Waco, and then 1 game at a third to be determined neutral site, they are no longer playing this upcoming season. The series is not canceled, does not mean that they're not going to play those 2 other games. I'm sure that they will. Ideally, it'll happen as soon as next year, and they'll just have a 1-year hiatus between these 2 games. But if we recall what happened last year when Gonzaga and Baylor played each other, ultimately Gonzaga and Baylor had pretty similar seasons where they didn't quite lead up to the expectations as top 10 teams coming into the season, and both finished on that dreaded 8-9 seed line in the NCAA tournament, both lost to number 1 seeds in the second round. They did not look remotely even on the first day of the season. Gonzaga walloped Baylor. 101-63 was the final score, a 38-point massacre by the Zags at the Spokane Arena against the then number 8 ranked team in the entire country in Baylor. Again, that game said a little bit about Baylor. It did not say as much about Gonzaga as we hoped that it would say about Gonzaga. The hope was that that was proof that this team was legitimately at one of, if not the very best team in college basketball. Pretty quickly after that, Gonzaga struggled against Arizona State and then struggled in the rest of their kind of marquee non-conference opponents, and then had we all know what happened. They had their lull in conference play, had the disastrous loss to Santa Clara, ultimately kind of found themselves at the end of the year, but it wasn't enough to overcome that game against Houston. But Baylor just never really found it after that. They struggled all season long, and now they, when given the opportunity, choose not to play Gonzaga. We don't know all of the ins and outs of why this game is not happening. We have not heard, and we probably will not hear, neither Mark Few or Scott Drew are going to come out and make a statement about why this game is not happening this season. Or if they did, it would be very unusual. It's possible we hear some smoke from, an unnamed source. Somebody says, oh, I heard it was this, so-and-so, but I don't know that we're ever going to get a clear answer as to why this game is not happening this year. But it's certainly, from an optics perspective, not hard to imagine that, we got our teeth kicked in last year, and most notably, Baylor replaced their entire roster this offseason. Gonzaga's had some years where they've had some roster overhaul, but I mean, I'm not kidding. Baylor has 0.0% of their players returning from last year's team. And they became this kind of talking point throughout the offseason of, this is what's wrong with college basketball. Look at what happened to Baylor. And yes, to some extent that is true. And I think the most notable example was their star freshman guard last year, Robert Wright, who was kind of expected to be a multi-year eventual superstar for the Baylor Bears, decided to hit the transfer portal after his first year because BYU dangled $3.5 million in front of him. And yeah, that is the kind of thing that fans do not like about modern college basketball. We're not going to dig all the way into that conversation right now, but it is justified. But the poor Baylor narrative that kind of came out this offseason, I think ignored the fact, and I've spoken about this with Locked On Baylor host Cameron Stewart, that Baylor kind of wanted some of these guys to be gone. Like Baylor did not want, they wanted Robert Wright back. They would have taken a handful of other guys back that ended up leaving. I'm sure they would have been fine if Langston Love or Jalen Celestine or guys like that came back. But there was also a lot of guys who were planning to come back, and Scott Drew sat down with them and said, hey, we're going to have a tough conversation right now. I think that this is for the best interest in Baylor and for you to move on and end up somewhere else. So Baylor ending up without any returners is not entirely like Scott Drew just throwing his hands up and going like, oh, where did everybody go? Like they had a hand in some of those guys not being back. But ultimately, it makes sense that Baylor maybe was like, we would rather not deal with having to play a Gonzaga team that brings back Graham Ike, that brings back Braden Huff, that has, a lot of new faces in the sense that they haven't played for Gonzaga yet, but guys who've been in the system like Braden Smith and Steele Venters and Jalen Warley, who all spent a year plus on the sidelines with this team last year. So again, I don't truly believe that Scott Drew's shaking in his boots somewhere like, oh no, like I can't imagine playing Gonzaga. Like it's not exactly that, but it wouldn't surprise me if we did ever find out that Baylor decided, hey, we'd rather take it a little bit easier this year with such a new look roster, especially with that game happening last year on the first day of the season. If Gonzaga was wanting to have that game be early this year, I could understand why Baylor wouldn't want to. Now, what we've heard, again, without any confirmed sources, is that Gonzaga replaced Baylor with the Oregon game, which they're playing Oregon on December 21st at the Moda Center. So I don't know if that means that Gonzaga was keeping that time period open for Baylor, in which case the game would have not been at the very beginning of the season, or if that just happened to be what lined up with Oregon at the time. But it is kind of something to keep an eye on, some interesting kind of wrinkle for this Baylor series. Now, Baylor's non-conference schedule, they have some decent games. They're playing Louisville. That game's in Fort Worth, so it's not a home game for Baylor, but it's not a road game for Baylor either. And that game is in February, so it's kind of cool to see those non-conference games in the middle of conference play happening again. Baylor's also playing UW, but they're bringing UW out to Waco. They're playing Memphis on the road, and I will commend Scott Drew for being willing to play Memphis at Memphis. That is a tough game, but it's not as good as Gonzaga's non-conference schedule. Few teams are, but Baylor's one of the teams that typically schedules like that. And so it's notable not just because they're not playing Gonzaga, but it's notable that they're not playing the kind of non-conference schedule that they typically play. And I think, and I said this phrase recently on the show, talking about UCLA's schedule, again, it's a little bit of that canary in a coal mine of like, hey, we're looking at something that is starting to become a trend that is probably not going to slow down, which is these high major power conference teams in the SEC, teams in the Big Ten, teams in the Big 12, certain teams in the ACC who are scheduling very easy non-conference slates because they're playing 18 tough games in the conference, or in the Big Ten's case, 20 games. You're playing 20 conference games. In the Big 12, they played 20 conference games last year. This year, they dropped back down to 18. But they've figured out, the Big 12 in particular figured out, if all of our teams play easy non-conference schedules, beat the tar out of teams like Tarleton State and Sam Houston State and Alcorn State and whomever else, rack up a bunch of 35-point wins, our net ranking is going to explode. And then we get into conference play and we have, 18 teams in our conference, and all of them are top 40 or top 50 teams, meaning you're getting a bunch of quad 1, a bunch of quad 2 games. And then you can go 12-8 in conference play, or now I guess it would be, 12-6 or 13-5 or whatever, or even 10-8. You can go 10-8 in conference. And if 10 of those wins, 8 of them are quad 1, you're going to get a 5 seed. And if there's no punishment, if there's no recourse for doing that, these teams are going to continue to do that. And I don't really blame them. It's not fun. We chuckled at UCLA's ridiculously weak non-conference schedule yesterday, and now we're chuckling at Baylor here not being willing to play Gonzaga. But it's not a good thing for college basketball. It's not a good thing for Gonzaga that this is happening. Gonzaga wants to play tough non-conference schedules. They are fortunate they're going to join a Pac-12 where their pressure to play super competitive non-conference schedules kind of eases up a little bit. They're still going to have to play, some of the best teams. They're still going to want to play and kind of have to play teams like Kentucky or Baylor or UCLA or whoever they can get on the schedule, because the new Pac-12 is still not competitive enough that you can just rely on conference play to get a top 5 seed. But there is less need to do it for Gonzaga in the Pac-12, which is a good thing. A, because it means Gonzaga will play more competitive games between January and March, which is good, but also because I think it's going to be harder for Gonzaga to schedule these games the way that they've typically been able to do in the past. Now, Gonzaga relies heavily on MTEs to be a good way to pick up valuable non-conference games, and they're doing that again this year. They're already playing Alabama and Maryland in the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas, and they will play a to-be-determined third team. And I bring that up because that to-be-determined third team could, in fact, be Baylor. Baylor is part of the Players Era Festival. They are one of the 18 teams in the event. The 2 games scheduled for Baylor at this point are St. John's and Creighton, so a couple of Big East battles for the Bears. And depending on how it goes, if both Gonzaga and Baylor go 1-1, if they both go 2-0, if in the worst case scenario they both go 0-2, they could be lined up to face each other on the third day of games, which is Wednesday, the 26th of November. So the dream of Gonzaga playing Baylor this year is not done. The dream of Gonzaga getting another crack at former Oregon State forward Michael Rataj, who transferred to Baylor this year, they could still end up seeing them in the Players Era Festival. They could, of course, end up seeing Baylor in the NCAA tournament as well, depending on how that bracket shakes out. But they will not officially play each other this year in a non-conference game after scheduling this 3-year series. And that's the big story coming out of this Baylor non-conference reveal on Tuesday. But folks, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the CW, not a topic I expected a lot of conversation about when I started podcasting about Gonzaga, but here we are, the same channel that showed Supernatural and Gossip Girl is now going to have some Gonzaga basketball games. But how many Gonzaga basketball games will actually end up on the CW? We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, most people, they can't even name all of their financial accounts or what they are worth. So whether it's your 401ks, your properties, or your investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. And Monarch does all the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. My wife and I, we spend so much time. We're looking at buying a new car right now. We're always trying to make sure our finances are in line with each other. And we can both see the budgets, we can see the goals, we can see the spending activity in one place with Monarch. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser. Put it in, you get half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com using code LOCKEDONCollege. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, the NFL season, it's almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a cannot-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. One of the great things about FanDuel is that you can fit however you like. You can bet player props, you can be building a same-game parlay, you can even jump into live action as it unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to add just a little bit more juice to your Sundays. The Seahawks, speaking of Sundays, 2.5-point underdogs against the 49ers on Sunday the 7th. They are at plus 116 to win that game outright if you're feeling like Seattle's going to get a W from their rival. And if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. All right, folks, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. We're going to talk here about the CW's official announcement that they are joining the Pac-12 media rights deal. But first, we have an important request. Locked On would like to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. So go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes or the QR code on YouTube. Thank you for helping us out. All right, folks, let's talk a little bit about this new media partner joining the Pac-12 in the 2026 season. I was going to say starting in 2026. The CW is actually currently a media partner for the Pac-12. They are hosting a handful of the football games between Oregon State and Washington State, or those teams play each other twice. They also play some other teams this year as well, and the CW is going to be part of that. So it's not a surprise whatsoever when it was officially announced on, I believe, Tuesday or Wednesday, that the CW is going to be part of the Pac-12's media package. They signed on from 2026 through 2031, so a 5-year deal. And we alluded to this last week as it had been reported that it was finalized and just had not been formally announced. But now that the formal announcement has come out, it also included some specific details. How many games the CW is going to have in each of the major sports. And so I want to talk about what that means for Gonzaga specifically, as we get a clearer picture of what this media package is going to look like when Gonzaga joins the Pac-12 officially in 2026. So the CW has announced that they will be sponsoring or broadcasting 66 events annually from the Pac-12. That'll include 13 football games, which is not relevant to Gonzaga, but still good information to have. It'll include 35 men's basketball games per year, as well as 15 women's basketball games. Also, crucially, the CW is now going to be the media partner that hosts the women's basketball Pac-12 conference semifinals and Pac-12 conference championship. So if Gonzaga is in the women's basketball Pac-12 conference championship or semifinals, those games will be available on the CW. So that is a big deal. That is a notable part of this media deal. We also already previously knew that CBS is planning to host the football championship for the Pac-12, as well as the men's basketball championship for the Pac-12. So we now know where the championships will be on TV for the 3 revenue-generating sports, football, men's, and women's basketball. We don't know where. That is one of the next steps for the Pac-12, is figuring out where those games are going to happen. But in terms of how this impacts Gonzaga, if Coach Lisa Fortier's team is in that championship game in the Pac-12, you will be wanting to find that game on the CW. CW sporting events will be produced by Pac-12 Enterprises, which is a TV production arm of the Pac-12 conference. So that's another kind of added detail to this specific relationship here. And again, the CW is making a big push into sports. For those of you who've been following this story for the last couple of years, who've been following the Pac-12 and the Oregon State, Washington State of it all, or for those of you who are new to following this conference after Gonzaga was set to join, you've probably heard a little bit about the CW. Some of you maybe have never heard of the CW, and the crossover between the types of programming that the CW has historically had and has been known for versus what sports fans tend to watch are very different. This is part of the reason that the CW is getting involved in sports, is they are learning that people pretty consistently watch sports, and they do not consistently watch the kind of programming that they typically have. And so they've started to make this pivot to expand their reach. The CW is known for shows like Supernatural or Smallville, Gossip Girl, Arrow, The Flash, Riverdale. I could go on and on. There's a whole bunch of them, typically superhero shows, kind of cheesy network programming type shows, not to denigrate any of those shows. I've seen some of them. They are good, but it's very different than what you typically would expect for a network that is now getting very involved in sports. The nice thing about the CW, though, is that it's very easy to access. It is free. It comes with most packages that people already have. If you have YouTube TV, you have the CW. If you have Fubo, you have the CW. It is not on Sling, so that is an unfortunate one. If you have Hulu Plus Live Sports, you have the CW. You can also get the CW app. It is not a difficult channel to acquire. It is not a difficult channel to watch games on. And I think that has long been one of the priorities for the Pac-12. They have stated this very clearly multiple times, that one of the things they care the most about is the visibility, making their sports, their football and basketball particularly, be easily accessible and have a wide reach. The CW and CBS, the 2 partners we know of so far, both accomplish that. So they are check on those major goals for the conference. Now, let's get back to the 35 men's basketball games. 35 men's basketball games will be somewhere between 20 and 25% of all of the basketball games that take place in men's basketball annually in the Pac-12. It depends on how many more teams the Pac-12 adds. It depends if the Pac-12 does a 16-game conference schedule, an 18-game conference schedule. But for the most part, 35 games is probably somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of all of the basketball games that'll happen year over year. I do not expect 25% or even 20% of Gonzaga's regular season men's basketball games to be on the CW. I expect it to be less. In fact, I expect it to be quite a bit less. CBS is a part of this media package. Obviously, football is king, and they are part of this for football. But at the same time, CBS, their desire to have basketball from the Pac-12 is rooted very, very, very much so in the brand of Gonzaga, in what Gonzaga brings to a media rights package. We know that. We know that Gonzaga's TV power is not just high, but like staggeringly high. One of the biggest in all of college basketball. CBS has already announced that they plan to broadcast, quote, at least 3 men's basketball regular season games per year. You're thinking only 3? Well, that's CBS flagship. The CBS Sports Network is planning to broadcast 17 men's basketball games every year, and that's regular season games. I suspect that if we take CBS at their word that they're going to have just 3 regular season men's basketball games, that at minimum 2 of them will be Gonzaga. Probably all 3 of them. It'll be like Gonzaga versus San Diego State, Gonzaga versus Boise State, maybe Gonzaga versus San Diego State again, maybe Gonzaga versus Boise State again, or versus Oregon State or Washington State. If St. Mary's joins, maybe it's that. Like, I think CBS is going to take Gonzaga a couple of times, and then I think the CBS Sports Network is going to, there's 17 games, they're going to get as many Gonzaga games as they can. I would speculate right now that the times that you're watching the CW this year or next year or the next 5 years are when Gonzaga is hosting Texas State or Fresno State or something like that. A game that is not particularly, is not expected to be super competitive. I think Gonzaga's better conference games in the Pac-12 will almost assuredly be on CBS or the CBS Sports Network. Not a bad thing if they end up on the CW. I'm not saying like it's a tragedy if Gonzaga games are on the CW. Again, it's easy to watch. The packaging, everything that went with it was pretty good for football. We'll see what it looks like for basketball. Maybe it'll be a little choppy early on, but I don't think that Gonzaga is going to spend a lot of time, at least not the men's program, on the CW. The women's program, at least the championship and semifinals will be there. I think there's a possibility that some other, again, 15 women's basketball games, so about 8 to 10%, will end up being on the CW. In that case, I actually think there's a fair amount of Gonzaga games that end up on the CW because I don't think CBS will want too many. But I think that the CW will, of the 15 games that they take for women's basketball, they'll want a lot of them to be Gonzaga or Oregon State, maybe Washington State in there as well. So I think that'll be a fun thing to end up tracking. But ultimately, I wouldn't expect the CW to be a huge regular player of Gonzaga men's basketball games. So what are the next steps? Well, John Canzano has continued to report, and he was right. He was dead on about this. He said they're going to announce Dallas Baptist. They're going to announce the partnership with the CW. And he said there's 1 or 2 other media partners that are eventually going to join the Pac-12. He doesn't know exactly who they are. He continues to theorize that Warner Brothers Discovery, which is the company that owns TNT, TBS, Max, True TV, that they are going to get involved. We do know that they have met with Octagon, which is the Pac-12's consulting firm. So again, this is to continue to use the metaphor of the show, that where there's smoke, there's fire. And the fact that this has been rumored for a while and that there are meetings happening between this consulting firm and Warner Brothers Discovery is a pretty good sign that something might be brewing with them potentially joining the conference. And then ESPN is also in the mix. I think more likely ESPN ends up kind of grabbing the non-revenue sports. If you wanted to watch Pac-12 soccer, Pac-12 softball, Pac-12 baseball, those sports would probably end up on ESPN, but maybe ESPN will also grab some other basketball games. We'll end up seeing if that happens or not. Canzano also reported that a source told him that a, quote, major streaming service is kicking the tires on the Pac-12. I'll take that with a bit of a grain of salt because kicking the tires really doesn't mean a whole lot. But if you're thinking major streaming services, maybe one that's based in the Pacific Northwest, you got to consider Amazon. Could be a potential option here. Apple, Amazon, one of those, Hulu, who knows? It's something to keep an eye on, as a major streaming service getting involved would certainly add some intrigue to the Pac-12 heading into the 2026-27 season. Well, folks, we're going to move on, close out the show talking Mario Saint-Supery and Spain, because they open EuroBasket play on Thursday, bright and early against Georgia. We're going to preview that and a pair of Zags who are in the AmeriCup event. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, when the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. And if you need parts fast for a project, Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Their Trademaster perks like priority shipping and dedicated support make the whole process smoother. So join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are closing out the show, just giving you some updates. There are 4 Gonzaga players, 3 former Zags, 1 incoming Gonzaga player, who are participating in the 2 major basketball tournament events that are going on simultaneously right now. That would be EuroBasket, which is kind of the most notable one, a collection of European countries squaring off against each other. That is, of course, where Mario Saint-Supery has been with Spain for the last couple of weeks. And then AmeriCup, which is kind of the answer to EuroBasket of North and South American countries who are squaring off against each other as well. All these things happening simultaneously, so thought it might be fun to kind of round up where we're at, what the next games are, who's participating, how they've done. So we're going to do that here. We'll start with Spain. Their first game is Thursday, August 28th. So if you're listening to this live, it's Wednesday afternoon. If you're listening to this Thursday morning or afternoon, you've probably already missed it, because Spain is taking on Georgia in the first game on Thursday in Cyprus. This game tips off at 5 a.m. Pacific time. So if you're in the East Coast and it's not quite 8 a.m., maybe you can catch this one. If it's past 7, 8 a.m. On the West Coast when you're listening to this on Thursday, you might want to check the box score, because that game is long done. Again, it's Spain taking on the country of Georgia. Spain, obviously, where Mario Saint-Supery is going to play this year. They also have a handful of current and former NBA players, Willy Hernan-Gomez, Sandy Altima, a few others. Georgia has only one notable name, Goga Bitadze, who's playing for the Indiana Pacers. This is a game that is projected by EuroBasket for Spain to win 96%, is what the projection is at right now. So this should be I don't want to say an easy game for Spain necessarily, but this is a game that they are heavy favorites to win on Thursday. And then they're part of a Group C, which features Spain and Georgia, as well as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cyprus, Greece, and Italy. So we know Spain will eventually end up playing Greece and Italy. Greece, of course, featuring one of the best players in all of the world for basketball, Giannis Antetokounmpo. They'll potentially also get a chance to play some very good players, including Danilo Gallinari at Italy. Bosnia features former Blazers center Jusuf Nurkic. So there's a lot of really good players that are in this group. Georgia's not going to be among the most challenging games for Spain, but it should be a fun opportunity to see how Mario looks against some very good players throughout this event. Serbia had their first game on Wednesday and already picked up a major W against Estonia. The game was 98-64 in favor of the Serbs. Filip Petrusev, former Zag, had a phenomenal game, 12 points and a pair of rebounds in just 18 minutes. He was 5 of 6 from the field, including knocking down both of his three-pointers. Superstar Nikola Jokic playing for Serbia. He had 11 points, 10 rebounds, and 7 assists in just 23 minutes, because that is what he does. Serbia is a heavy favorite to win this whole thing. Spain is up there. I think Spain has the 3rd best odds, 4th best odds, maybe. I know Germany's got good odds, but Serbia is the favorite. And this team has played together a lot. They have Jokic, they have Bogdan Bogdanovic, they obviously have Filip Petrusev, they have a handful of others, Nikola Jovic for the Miami Heat among them. This Serbian team is very, very good. Their next game will be on Friday, the 29th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, so a much more palatable time. And that game will be against Portugal and former Utah State center Neemias Queta, which should be fun to watch as well. Moving over to AmeriCup, we got a pair of former Zags participating in that event. Kyle Wiltjer, representing Canada, who went 3-0 and is into the quarterfinals. All the quarterfinal games are taking place on Thursday. And Canada will take on Colombia on Thursday, that game at 8:10 p.m. Pacific time. So if you're looking for something to do late on Thursday night, that would be a fun thing to do. Kyle Wiltjer, through those first 3 games at the AmeriCup, averaged just about 10 points, 4 boards, and a little over 2 assists. Been very fun to see him balling out for a Canadian team that also features NBA rookie Keyshawn George, or rookie last year, Keyshawn George, a handful of other really fun players on that Canadian roster. So it's been fun to see them come together. And then the Dominican Republic. And we haven't talked about Angel Nunez yet, but we've talked about Petrusev. We've talked about Mario quite a bit. We talked about Wiltjer, but we need to talk about Angel Nunez. Angel Nunez, who spent 2 years at Gonzaga, was not a big player. I think he was there 14-15 and 15-16. He had transferred from Louisville, and then he played 2 years at Gonzaga. Then he played a year at South Florida, and then has been playing a decorated professional career overseas. He's played in Puerto Rico. He's played in the Dominican Republic. He's played in Mexico. He's played in Spain. He's played all sorts of places. And now Nunez is representing his home country, the Dominican Republic, and they will play. They also went 3-0 in the group stage, and they will play Brazil also on Thursday, this game at 12:10, so a little lunchtime action for you all. Nunez is averaging 11 points and 4.7 rebounds through those first 3 games, and he led the Dominican Republic to a win over Nicaragua in their final game of the group stage, and he had 17 points, 8 rebounds, and a pair of blocks in that game. And it was a really tremendous performance from Nunez, not just because of the stats, 17 and 8, but because his team, the Dominicans, really needed him. David Jones, who played last year at Memphis, is a very, very good college basketball player and is now with the San Antonio Spurs on a 2-way contract. In Dominican's game against Argentina, towards the end of the game, there'd been a lot of chatter. There'd been some comments made by the Argentinian coaching staff that were not well received by the Dominicans. And towards the end of the game, a full-on brawl broke out. And I'm not talking about like when the bullpen in a baseball game kind of jogs out there and jogs back. Like, no, these dudes were. It was a brawl. Like it was a full-on brawl. And FIBA ended up suspending David Jones for his part in the altercation for 2 games, which included that game against Nicaragua. And Jones was averaging like 24 points a game. He was the best player for the Dominican Republic by far. And so in a game against Nicaragua, when their best player gets suspended, Angel steps up, puts together a phenomenal 17.8 rebound game. And I just want to give him some flowers, some shout outs. What a cool way to get a chance to represent your country on the world stage, to then get an opportunity to step into a bigger role and then go out and kill. I mean, they only won this game by 4. Like, they needed every part of what Angel Nunez did in this game. So it's really cool to see that happen for him. They're taking on Brazil on Thursday, like we said, at 12:10. Also on Thursday, USA will take on Uruguay, and then Puerto Rico will take on Argentina. Those are the other 2 teams still remaining in the quarterfinals. Depending how those teams do, they'll play in the semifinals on Saturday, and then that championship and third place game will be on Sunday. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about Wiltjer versus Nunez. They were both teammates for 2 years at Gonzaga. It would be cool to see them square off in a championship game. We can root for the U.S. too. We're not anti-U.S. on the podcast. If the United States makes it to the championship game, hopefully they're playing one of Canada or the Dominican Republic, but I'm also not going to be too upset if it ends up being Canada versus the DR in that championship game either. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Always want to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners as well. Be back with more later this week, more into next week as well, as we continue to keep you up to date on what's going on with Gonzaga. Hopefully get an update on Tyon Grant-Foster, keep you in the know on what's going on with Mario Saint-Supery and Gonzaga's schedule as it comes together. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, go Zags.